The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society. And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. We decided long ago that the dangers of excessive and unwarranted concealment of pertinent facts far outweighed the dangers which are cited to justify it.
Hello, this is Dan Wigington with GeoEngineeringWatch.org radio, the Global Alert Weekly News Update for Saturday, August 29th. The circus of insanity continues around us on every side. Although many are distracted, it doesn't change what's happening, doesn't alter what's happening. For me, every day, many days, feel like Groundhog Day in some sense. You wake up and the insanity picks up where it did the day before, things happening around the globe, not being disclosed by our media, while we're shown ridiculous mass distraction on every mainstream media channel. It just starts over and over again every day, but truly cataclysmic events are unfolding around the globe that can't be hidden much longer. And that trend is starting to wake some up as, again, these changes become more and more grave. People are realizing that their denial won't save them. Is it just a coincidence that there's always some spectacular event that all the mainstream media uses to distract from public view the unfolding catastrophes that surround us? A few days ago, we had the journalist shooting on camera. That is certainly a tragic event. I'm not downplaying that at all. But isn't it astounding how there's always some distraction to pull people's minds off of much more grave overall events that involve thousands, tens of thousands of lives, perhaps at some point millions of lives? We don't see it because there's always some other drama that's being shown to us. And although that drama matters in and of itself, in the bigger picture, it gives them an excuse to screen things from view that the public should see. And then we see the stories, of course, about the elected officials and various groups that claim to be protecting our children from organizations like Planned Parenthood, for example. But these are the same people, the elected officials and certain organizations that are making such a to-do about some issues while blatantly and willfully ignoring, for example, a risk to our children that's exponentially larger, already killed who knows how many children. Respiratory mortality is going off the chart around the globe. If we have an issue like climate engineering, for example, that we know from lab testing is saturating our atmosphere with highly toxic materials like aluminum, like barium. We have 70 lab tests in Shasta County alone in Northern California to prove that our breathable air column is completely laden with toxic heavy metals, heavy metal particulates, so much it's changed soil pH values in the Shasta Trinity forests by as much as 10 to 12 times toward alkaline. That's a lot of aluminum. Specifically, aluminum is a major part of what's showing up in our testing. If we know that this is being inhaled by our children by climate engineering programs that are being done without any environmental impact review, any oversight whatsoever, why aren't these organizations jumping up and down about that? Why is that ignored? So the hypocrisy is truly astounding. And our elected officials that claim to want to protect our children, so they can reach an age where they can go fight in some war of foreign occupation that's about resources somewhere? Again, we live in a society that has an immense amount of hypocrisy. And on these toxic metals that we're all breathing, by the way, they're all toxic in and of themselves, but you mix them together and you have what's called synergistic toxicity. It becomes much more lethal. Is it any wonder that we have now, since 1975, a 10,000% increase in autism? Is it any wonder that now 1 in 3 seniors in the U.S. dies with Alzheimer's and or dementia? Not dies from it, but dies with it. We are all breathing this material in, and we have no acknowledgement of that. On last week's show, speaking of media lack of disclosure, I outlined the total tyranny of media sources, including our local media, the record Searchlight. A little bit has happened since last week. I want to outline that before getting to other issues. Searchlight feels they have the right to completely censor any coverage whatsoever on major community events, most recently one with over 1,000 in attendance. Again, an event that had former government scientists speaking out, former defense industry, local top health officials like neurologists. We have so many experts at this meeting, and yet we have a Searchlight editor, in this case Mr. Silas Lyons, who thinks that he has the right to censor the media. So since last week's show, Silas Lyons and his editor, Carol Ferguson, were mailed a recently published peer-reviewed study, a study published in the International Journal of Environmental Research and Public Health, stating that all available evidence and testing indicates that climate engineering is in fact real and ongoing and very dangerous. So when that full study was mailed to the Searchlight with a message asking them to examine it, what was their response? Here's the response by managing editor Carol Ferguson. A news release about a study by a chemtrail believer is questionable in a questionable journal posted to the Reuters news agency is not covering geoengineering. Now, where does Carol Ferguson, a managing editor, come off calling a PhD scientist just a chemtrail believer? And this is the sort of deciding, she doesn't use the science terms that all of us use, solar radiation management, stratospheric aerosol geoengineering. They have to resort to the marginalized terms because they don't want to give this issue credibility. So Ms. Ferguson continues. She says, I thought it was a combination of aluminum, bromine, and strontium. She says, none of this matches sound scientific principles or even passes Occam's razor, which is why we, the Record Searchlight, won't cover it. So first we have, again, the Searchlight deciding that they don't have to cover a community event because they, without any scientific credentials whatsoever, have decided that none of this deserves to even be mentioned to the public, even though we have about 6 lab tests in Shasta County alone proving a mountain of toxic metal falling on us. We have government scientists, everything I went over. But the Searchlight decides they don't have to cover any of this. My response to Mrs. Ferguson follows. Carol, the study was done by a PhD scientist. Why does the Searchlight insist on using clearly derogatory terms like chemtrail believer for such a qualified, credentialed scientist? So to be clear, anything that challenges the denial of the Searchlight is, quote, questionable. Next, from your comment, it appears clear that you did not bother to read the study in question. You get to decide that a peer-reviewed published study, quote, does not match sound scientific principles and is contrary to Occam's razor. Can you tell me what your science qualifications are to make such a decision for the public, Carol? A decision that you and the Searchlight feel gives you the right to censor news. And no matter what your personal opinion, on which you and the Searchlight decide what gets disclosed to the public or not, what rationale is there for blocking out a community meeting with so many in attendance, 1,000 or more, and again with former government scientists, defense industry people, health industry professionals, city officials, former military, etc.? The blatant arrogance and irresponsibility of the Record Searchlight becomes more astounding by the day. Thankfully, the community is now waking up and watching. I will be sure to go over this conversation in my weekly KQMS radio show, which I'm doing now, so that the public will be kept informed of what's transpiring. This is the bottom line. Do organizations like the Searchlight and editors like Lyons and Ferguson have the right to completely censor news that has absolute credibility to it, that the community has a right to know and decide for themselves what they choose to accept or not? That's the kind of media that's brought us to this dark place, media that decides what we see, what we don't see. And the same is true. The same is exactly true on the bigger picture. Have you heard our media talking much about the fact that we're in the 6th grade extinction right now? Not much. Have you heard any discussion of the fact that we've lost nearly 2/3 of global wildlife populations in the last 40 years, only 40 years, no mention of that. No, we're seeing dramas because they decide, like the Searchlight decides, what we see and what we don't see. So last week we covered expanding global forest fires and the cataclysm they are causing from countless directions. Again, another thing the media doesn't talk much about unless the forest happens to be in your backyard that's burning. We have forests burning down in Siberia. This is, along with the forests in North America and other places, depositing soot on what's left of the ice in the polar zones of the Arctic. This darkens the ice, causes it to absorb more thermal energy. It's melting very rapidly. A lot of downstream cataclysmic effects. We have huge ocean warming die-off happening right now. Whales washing up all over Alaska. Record-shattering amounts of dead whales floating, washing up on beaches. Do we hear any of this? We don't. So it's up to us to search out this data for ourselves, because institutions like the Searchlight decide for us what we see and what we don't see. Last week I also spoke of the inevitable market meltdown. The following is a headline from last week. The great props to the world economy are now beginning to fall. China is going into reverse, and the emerging markets that consume so many of our products are crippled by currency devaluation. The famed BRICS of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, to whom the West was supposed to pass on the torch of economic growth, are in varying states of disarray. The stock market is and always has been a facade. It's nothing more than a mechanism of those in power. No matter how much manipulation the central bankers attempt, and they're manipulating right now, the damage control comes into the market. When the markets begin to crash, they prop them up again. And those who can't see this are not looking very closely at this point. The bottom line is this: when the biosphere collapses, the illusion of perpetual expansion and plunder on a finite planet with finite resources will shatter. There is no other possible outcome. The moment the planet can no longer sustain and support the destructive paradigm that has been in the past, a paradigm shift will occur. This shift is already unfolding rapidly. Regarding biosphere collapse, an article by Dr. Glenn Berry is telling and appropriate for this conversation. The title is Biosphere Collapse, the Biggest Economic Bubble Ever, again by Dr. Glenn Berry. The article states, the global environment collapse, as in the pursuit of short-term growth, humanity overruns natural ecosystems, including the atmosphere, that make Earth habitable. Together, we urgently need to address inequity, climate change, overpopulation, and natural ecosystem loss. Or alone, we each face the horrors of economic, social, and ecological collapse. Newspapers are full of disastrous warnings if economic growth does not return to Greece, or if it drops a couple points in China. Rarely in human history have so many been so fundamentally wrong about a matter of such importance as the desirability and even the possibility of perpetual economic growth. The real threat to human well-being is not that there is too little economic growth. Rather, it is that there is too much, and that we have overshot how much growth can occur without collapsing our shared environment. Side note, mathematically speaking, we would need 4 to 5 planet Earths to keep the current paradigm going. The article continues, the industrial growth economy is ravaging natural ecosystems. Stocks of natural capital, including water, soil, old-growth forests, wild fish, etc., are being pillaged to artificially inflate short-term economic growth. Modern industrial capitalism's narrow focus upon GDP growth as a measure of society's well-being utterly fails to account for the very real and detrimental cost of liquidating Earth's natural life support systems. Infinite growth on a finite planet is a recipe for disaster. Nothing grows forever, and trying to inevitably rips apart any system seeking to do so. Continued ravaging of Earth's natural ecosystems for short-term growth is the biggest economic bubble ever. Such a short-term, myopic focus upon economic growth can only end in social and ecological collapse. The global ecological system is collapsing and dying. The biosphere, our one shared environment that makes Earth habitable, is having its constituent ecosystems liquidated for resources. Inequitable overconsumption has achieved such momentum that key ecological planetary boundaries have been surpassed, raising the very real possibility of humanity pulling down the entire biosphere as we collapse. Again, another side note, Earth's former energy balance has been completely derailed. The planet is now warming at the rate of 4 Hiroshima bombs per second. That's the thermal energy of 4 Hiroshima nuclear explosions per second, 400,000 per day. That's how fast the thermal energy buildup is occurring on our planet. Dr. Glenn's article continues, far more is at stake than abrupt climate change, as natural ecosystem loss, ocean dead zones, freshwater scarcity, soil erosion, nitrogen deposition, and many other aspects of ecological decline merge and worsen the others. This sudden surge of human impact upon the naturally evolved biosphere, as human numbers went from 1 to 7 billion in just over a century, can fairly be characterized as willful ecocide. Yet, this relentless industrial growth continues to be falsely equated with progress. Many are unlikely to respond to warnings of imminent doom from specialists until they are much more uncomfortable and unhappy than they are now. By then, it will be too late. Statistically speaking, another side note, we are far past the point of any return to the planet we have once known. That's done. The article continues again. Progress to avoid global biosphere collapse has been impeded by numerous other maladies that plague the human condition, including inequity, permawar, disease, abject poverty, and authoritarianism. Horrendous inequity whereby a few hundred people possess half the Earth's wealth, as more than 1 billion live on less than $1.50 a day. This paradigm will kill us all. The vision, subtitle, exponential economic growth on a finite Earth can only end in collapse. Humanity must embrace a steady state economy whereby the increment of natural capital harvested is replenished annually. The human family will only avert biosphere collapse if we choose to live more simply and go back to the land, have fewer kids, protect and restore ecosystems, grow more of our own food and in fossil fuels. Again, these are the perspectives of Dr. Berry, but very accurate. The only dispute at the end I would have is that there are huge factors left out of this equation that are not acknowledged, as we see so many are unwilling to admit to factors like climate engineering that is eliminating our ability to grow our own food. And I say this firsthand. I live on the east side of Lake Shasta, once had a raised garden bed about 100 feet long that was easy to maintain and was a jungle of vegetables. We can't grow 10 feet of that now because the UV radiation is so incredibly intense, a direct result of climate engineering. And the soils are so contaminated with toxic heavy metals, which kills beneficial soil microbes and has a very direct effect on root systems. And we have peer-reviewed study on the effect of aluminum, and we know the aluminum is in the rain. We know it is. We have so many lab tests, so many posted lab tests taken in many cases by former government scientists. There is no question this material is contaminating everything. So how do we go back to the land and grow anything when you have so many people, environmentalists especially, I'm sorry to say, that are ignoring the climate engineering juggernaut of insanity that's decimating our planet from top to bottom. So the bottom line is, with so many articles, we have to consider that there's a very big factor being left out. I'll finish with the article. It continues. Large and connected natural ecosystems must remain the context for human society. No environment, no people. That's simple. Human settlements must exist within the limits of their bioregions, linking human being with local ecological constraint. Those that are smarter and work harder will still have more, but not grotesquely so. Basic needs of all humanity, natural ecosystems, and kindred species will be met. The challenge of our time is to quickly embrace these necessities while remaining free and extending the benefits of an economically secure and free existence to all Earth's inhabitants. Failure in efforts to promote smaller families, fossil fuels, reduction of fossil fuels, and to restore natural ecosystems will mean worsening widespread ecological havoc, mass death, and the bad sort of anarchy before humanity and Earth drop into nothingness. Now, I realize a lot of people don't want to hear anything that I just stated, that they are not about to want to reduce their consumption, but they very soon will not have a choice. It's a mathematical certainty, an absolute certainty. We've become completely disconnected from the biosphere. Man's war against nature is a war against himself, period. And this chapter, the Anthropocene, the age of man, this is an era, a scientific era in time called the Anthropocene. That's the era we're in. And it will end very poorly, very soon, on the current trajectory. That's a mathematical certainty. It's up to all of us to learn what's happening and learn what we need to do to change course. The final paragraph of the article, a better life than endless consumption of toxic material that kills ourselves and others is possible. It requires returning to the life-giving envelope of natural ecosystems and valuing experience over stuff. Much is already known regarding proven techniques to live and work more sustainably. Educate yourself and start to transition to a sustainable life. Now, again, the key word there is sustainable. What we have done to the planet is completely unsustainable. The epitome of destruction from the human race would certainly have to be climate engineering, and that issue alone has caused cataclysmic damage over a very short time span. On that note, and the level of damage that we see, mainstream media is finally starting to cover some of what is happening, but yet still in a method that downplays the severity. CNN has issued a recent report stating today a sixth mass extinction could be well underway. Where do they get the word could? We mathematically know that we're losing 200 to 300 species of plant, animal, and insect a day. We mathematically know that's 15,000 times the background rates of extinction. That's 1.5 million% higher than background rates of extinction. We know in the last 40 years, fully nearly two-thirds of Earth's wildlife populations have perished, while human populations have doubled. How can they say that we could be in a mass extinction? Because CNN's job, like all mainstream media's job, is to pacify the public, to pretend they're covering issues in an objective way when they're not. Or in other cases, again, like mentioned earlier, the Searchlight simply omits news altogether. But we have other organizations like CNN that covers the news in a very spun way, saying things could be true that are mathematically absolutely true and have long since been true. So this is the sort of mainstream media coverage that we need to learn to see through. CNN continues, the researchers fear 75% of the species we know today could be lost in just 2 generations' time. If we've already lost in the last 40 years nearly 2/3, why would it take 2 more generations to lose another 15% when the extinction rate is accelerating, not decreasing? People think that such headlines from CNN are alarmism. They are radically, radically conservative of how bad things truly are. The CNN article continues, we have the potential for making massive change, and the bottom line is that we can't be the generation responsible for wiping out 3/4 of life forms on Earth, says Bernowski. He's a researcher. Biodiversity provides critical functions, including the air in the atmosphere and purifying drinking water. Life as we know it depends on having high levels of species diversity, scientists say. Now, Again, most people know this, so do we need CNN to tell us that it's necessary to have an environment before we can survive? The article continues with a quote from one of the major researchers. People think nothing bad will come from species loss because scientists can't predict exactly how many need to go extinct before the world collapses. The problem is that our environment is likely a brick wall. This is an important scenario. It will hold if you pull individual bricks, but eventually it takes just one to make the wall suddenly fall apart. It's important people understand that. They can think that everything's fine because McDonald's is still selling Big Macs and Walmart's still open, until they're not. And we are perilously close to a paradigm change, no matter how much people try to refuse that notion or deny it. Reality is unfolding, and there's no stopping the inertia of what's coming. The CNN article finishes, while extinction is a natural function of life, this is the first time humans are being confronted with species loss at rates that are, and thankfully CNN gives a relatively accurate figure here, 10,000 times faster than what is considered natural rate. We've been saying this for years. The data indicated this from the frontline researchers for years. CNN is just now getting to this. The problem of extinction is becoming very serious. This is still the CNN article. But it is not too late, says a researcher. They always give us that. They always give us the, it's not too late, we can fix it all. We have the potential of initiating a mass extinction episode, which has been unparalleled for 65 million years. Been over that. Extinction rate is already happening. Mass extinction is already here, but they still indicate that we might go down this road. But the researcher says, and this is the only kind that get published in mainstream media, but I'm optimistic in the sense that humans react. In the past, we have made quantum leaps when we work together to solve a problem. Do you see anybody trying to work together to really help save the environment on a scale that matters? The environmental groups that we've tried to introduce the climate engineering issue to, which is the greatest single devastating force on the planet, won't even look at the data. They're busy saving a fish and a frog here and there, but ignoring the giant hole in the bottom of the boat, which is geoengineering, which is contaminating all life on Earth, tearing apart Earth's life support systems, disrupting the hydrological cycle, shredding the ozone layer. There's not much bad that geoengineering doesn't do. Again, that's why we're so focused on that particular issue. It shut the water off to California. There's no question that's directly related to climate engineering. I challenge anyone, search engineered drought catastrophe, target California. Search that. Just search engineered drought catastrophe and start looking at data. Please don't believe anything I'm saying. Simply do some investigation and stop listening to the paid off quote-unquote experts that mainstream media puts up to pacify us, put us back to sleep, and keep us from really understanding what's happening around us. So here's what this expert from CNN says as a final note. Reduce your carbon footprint. He says this is to hold back climate change from falling below critical levels and to prevent altered conditions which can ravage fragile ecosystems. Again, can ravage? If we're losing 200 to 300 species a day, is that not already in that category? He continues, never buy products made from threatened or endangered species, ivory, as if this is going to really change the direction. But this is the sort of really unuseful advice we get. Eat less meat. He goes on to say land used to feed livestock. I agree that livestock is destructive for the environment, but he gives a few suggestions here. Burn less carbon. That's about the end of the CNN article. My question is this. When we know we have such a cataclysm happening around us, is a few little steps going to save everything? Is buying a solar panel and a Prius going to change anything? It's not. What does it take to make a solar panel? What does it take to make a Prius? Is that not fossil fuels? Is that not... Again, our situation is far more dire than people understand. And by the way, and I'm an advocate for renewable energy. My home was on the cover of the world's largest renewable energy magazine. But let's look at reality in that regard too. Quote-unquote renewable energy is simply an extension of fossil fuels. It's better than fossil fuels, but it's simply an extension of fossil fuels. So let's look at a couple of the chemicals used to make, for example, solar panels. Hexafluoroethane, it's 12,000 times more potent than CO2 as a greenhouse gas. That gas is used and released into the environment as part of solar panel manufacturing. Nitrogen trifluoride, 17,000 times more potent than CO2 as a greenhouse gas. Again, there is no quote-unquote truly green energy. And back to geoengineering, how it affects renewable energy and our economy. As mentioned earlier, no biosphere function, no economy. Climate engineering reduces rain overall. Yes, there's still deluge, but overall, it reduces rain, reduces wind. When you change convection, you alter wind patterns. Climate engineering reduces wind. And climate engineering, most specifically, reduces sun. That is the express purpose of solar radiation management, to block the sun. How many clear days do we see in Northern California now that aren't plastered with the remnants of whatever comes out of these aircraft? And we know a lot of what that whatever it is because we test. We know aluminum, barium, strontium, all the elements listed in geoengineering patents are raining down on all of us. How many clear skies do we see? So how good is renewable energy when we're spending inconceivable amounts of money to fly jets all over the globe and block the sun as part of solar radiation management programs? This is truly a circle of insanity, this whole scenario we face. And even the state of California recognized, I spoke in front of the California Energy Commission some years back in Sacramento. The Energy Commission recognized they were losing the state, I should say, was losing 20 to 40% of its rainfall due to, quote, particulates of unknown origin. At that meeting, a $200,000 meter was approved for purchase from Scripps Institute to determine the chemical composition and origin of these particulates, as if the state of California wouldn't know where such a massive amount of particles was coming from. That's the last we've ever heard of that device. $200,000 purchase by the state. It apparently went into a closet somewhere because these programs are a no-go for disclosure. They're not about to disclose these programs because who's keeping the state afloat? Where does the money come from? Let's go right back to the central banks that are keeping the artificial stock market afloat. Where does the state's $30, $40, $50 billion yearly deficit go? Does anybody even ask? Where did last year's deficit go, or the year before, or the year before that? The printed central bank money monopoly machine is keeping the entire system afloat. And it has until now, until the biosphere collapse overwhelms the money printing potential. It's simply important to understand all these issues are all connected. All of them are connected. So when we have, again, this kind of sky above us every day in Redding, I challenge anyone to simply research solar radiation management. Read about it, digest the science data relating to this issue, and ask yourself why we don't know about this. And then let's take a look back at media institutions like the Searchlight, who decide for us what we are told and what we are not told. That's why we don't know about these issues. Let's look at another huge weather phenomenon, and I want to present the data, and listeners can decide where the dots connect. The total interference with Earth's natural systems is truly incomprehensible at this point. How good can it be to completely suppress, for example, hurricanes, which are one of the primary climate functions of the planet? Hurricanes are one of the ways that Earth attempts to cool itself as the overall warming continues to spiral upward, and it is on planet Earth. It's, from every measure, the planet is in meltdown. Cyclones cause a mixing of the oceans and thus reduces ocean stratification. Stratification is a layering of the oceans. Improper mixing means a dead ocean, and we are seeing dead oceans. A lack of ocean mixing is already wreaking havoc on marine ecosystems. How many people have stopped to wonder, and this is the very key question, why there has not been a single major hurricane landfall in the US in over 10 years? Think about that. Let's look at a hurricane patent a patent for suppressing hurricanes, more correctly stated. And I'm reading right from the patent at this point. And I want to give some dots here, and again, listeners can connect on their own. I'm reading right from the patent: hurricane mitigation by combined seeding with condensation and freezing nuclei. Right from the abstract of the patent. The invention provides a method for treating a tropical cyclone, a tropical storm, or a tropical depression. The method includes reducing unloading of cloud parcel water in the tropical cyclone, tropical storm, or tropical depression. In a preferred embodiment, unloading of cloud parcel water is accomplished by seeding with cloud condensation nuclei, such as submicron ammonium sulfate particles. That's got to be good for us. Yeah, let's spread it around the atmosphere along with the aluminum and barium and strontium and everything else they spray, because there's no regulation. It's important to understand that. There is no regulation, even from California Air Resources Board, no regulation on climate modification whatsoever. What does that mean? It means they can dump whatever they want on you. They have set the laws up for that reason, so that there is no oversight. So this is what we have, a patent, that's a portion from the abstract of a hurricane suppression patent. Now again, no major hurricane landfalls in 10 years. So when we consider that there are patents for this type of suppression, when we look at an article, in fact, and I encourage people to search out any of this, again, the fact there's been no major hurricanes, this is a recent article. Right from an article and a study that covers this, no major hurricane defined as Category 3 or above has made landfall on the continental United States since 2005, according to records compiled by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, Hurricane Research Division. That is the longest stretch of time, this is right from their study, that is the longest stretch of time the United States has gone without a Category 3 or above hurricane striking somewhere in the mainland of the country, according to NOAA, and hurricane records going back to 1851. Think about that. After an all-time record year in 2005, with oceans warming faster than ever, suddenly no major landfalls. Their study continues. In 2005, according to NOAA, a greater number of major hurricanes struck the U.S. mainland than any year on record. That year, 4 Category 3 storms hit the U.S. He names the storms. And let's consider that. So we go from radically increasing hurricanes and an all-time record amount of impacts in 2005 to nothing. Nothing in 10 years. And again, for those who think Sandy was a major hurricane, it was not. It did major damage, but it wasn't a major hurricane. How is this possible? How is this possible? When the primary researcher on this study was asked how he thinks this happened, here's his reply. Quote, I like to think of it as Mother Nature giving us a little bit of a break after giving us a beating in 2004 and 2005. That's my best guess, but I don't know. He continues, the pause is an unlikely event, so as ascribing to the significance of it as a challenge, he said. What does that mean? I don't know. They have no clue, because you can't rationally explain away how you could have rapidly warming oceans producing ever more violent storms, still occurring in other places of the globe, by the way, but suddenly it just stops here. We know we have hurricane suppression patents. We can certainly see spraying going on over the tops of these storms. It's very visible on radar. Spraying of these particulates, which is exactly what this patent describes, to reduce convection and suppress cyclonic rotation, is certainly what we seem to see. And mathematically speaking, the likelihood of record warm oceans with no hurricanes making landfall in 10 years, it's a statistical impossibility. Why would we have that? Let's take a look at just how many records were broken in 2005. Most tropical storms, most hurricanes, most Category 5 hurricanes, most hurricane names to be retired, most major hurricanes to hit the U.S., most damage ever recorded, highest amount of cyclone energy ever recorded, latest into a hurricane season, January 6th. We have other records broken in 2005. Strongest Atlantic hurricane ever. Fastest intensification ever. Most damaging hurricane ever. Greatest storm surge from an Atlantic hurricane. The most intense hurricane. We have the furthest south hurricane, furthest north hurricane. The list goes on. How do we go from that to no landfalls in 10 years? And again, at the very same time, with record warm ocean temperatures, record warm Gulf of Mexico, and by the way, in the Gulf of Mexico, we certainly see a lot of motive why they wouldn't want hurricanes to spin there, don't we? We have a sea of oil sitting at the bottom of the Gulf of Mexico from the Macondo oil spill. We have sea levels that are rising very rapidly. In fact, a new headline on that today I'll get to in a moment. So we have oil production also in the Gulf that I would imagine the powers that be don't want disturbed. So again, 10-year low in landfalls in spite of just prior to this all-time record-shattering year, even warmer oceans since then. How do we have a stop in hurricane landfalls? At the same time, new headline, 2 days old, record Pacific cyclones. Tropical cyclone activity in the western North Pacific Ocean basin continues at a record pace this year, a leading atmospheric scientist said Monday. We have the Category 4 or 5 cyclones this year through Tuesday, August 18th, set a year-to-date record for the Northern Hemisphere, smashing the previous record of 7 such intense tropical cyclones in 2014. So we've gone from 7 to 12. The previous records set just last year, shattered again this year. This is impressive, the article goes on to say, since the Atlantic Basin had yet to produce a single hurricane, much less one of that intensity. These scientists are taking note also. They're scratching their heads, and they're wondering, why is nothing happening in the Atlantic Basin where it would impact the U.S.? Why is nothing happening there? Interestingly enough, since the headlines came out about this unexplainable lull and landfalls to the U.S., now, as of today, we do have a hurricane on the radar. As of actually Thursday last week, Hurricane Erica seems to be forming. So perhaps such headlines are not desirable. I'm not saying hurricanes obviously would be forming very consistently. There's no explanation for them not forming consistently unless we look at geoengineering patents, and an obvious motive by those in power to suppress these storms. And again, for those who think this is a good thing, suppressing hurricanes, it may be a good thing for you if you live on the coast in the short term, but in the long term, if the planet's life support systems are completely hindered, how much damage does that do? We can't know. There's no such study to shed any light on the overall global cataclysms being caused because the Earth's life support systems are being horribly suppressed by those who have decided it's their right to play God with the weather, with horribly toxic atmospheric spraying, completely destructive ionosphere heaters, ground-based radio frequency transmitters that are used to manipulate these particulates that are sprayed into the atmosphere, transmitters like HAARP that many have heard of. This is an all-out free-for-all with the atmosphere, literally weather whack-a-mole, with competing powers involved. And any form of weather modification, again, must be considered weather warfare and biological warfare. You have to consider that climate modification is all the above. If you disrupt the weather, and we see the cataclysms happening around the globe, at that point, if the entire system is disrupted, all roads lead back to that which disrupted it. And if everything material-wise that's used in these programs is highly toxic, showing up in lab tests, how can that not be considered biological warfare? And what are the downstream effects of this sort of climate intervention, if you will. We have a headline as of today: signs of Gulf Stream slowdown, sea level more than a foot higher off the East Coast. That's a headline. The article continues. It's the stuff that climate disaster movies are made of, but the events are all too real, happening now, and not part of some dramatized script played out on the silver screen. The article continues. Signs abound that global ocean circulation is being profoundly altered by human-forced climate change. And although this particular article, an author, like so many, will not address the climate engineering issue, how can we not consider geoengineering or climate engineering as the most major factor in the climate disruption? Not the only factor, but the most major factor. How can we not consider that? That's a form of human-caused climate change as well, in addition to the other factors. The article continues. A pool of cold water has developed in the North Atlantic. England is getting slammed by anomalous winter-type rains and gales in August. And sea surface heights off the East Coast are more than 30 centimeters a foot, 1 foot, above the 1979 to 2015 average. 1 foot above that average. It's already causing issues in Florida, in Virginia, other places. And now we know from this headline how fast sea levels are truly rising. And again, climate engineering, although we're told it is to mitigate global warming and a runaway greenhouse effect, all available data indicates it's making it far worse, not better. Shredding the ozone layer causes more thermal energy to penetrate the atmosphere. Look at our trees around Reading. Take a good look. Look at the bark in parking lots, and you'll hear people say it's just the heat of the parking lot, it's just the windshields from the cars. That's nonsense. The bark is burned off the trees in the forest as well. There's no parking lots and cars in the middle of the wilderness. The bark is just as burned off. Don't let someone give you a lame excuse to pacify you into ignoring what's happening. In regard to the massive UV levels that we're being exposed to, UV radiation, we are metering this, and we know it is astronomically higher than what we're being told. We know we're being exposed to UVB radiation that's 10 times higher than what's being disclosed. That's 1,000% of normal. Feel the surfaces of cars. You can feel this on the surface, on your skin. It's not your imagination. It's not just because you're getting old. Look around and use your sense of reason. UV is absolutely astoundingly high right now. And research this. Research geoengineering destroys ozone layer. Look at the science data. There's science study on this. Connect the dots. Use your sense of reason. It's up to all of us. So when we look back at, again, more headlines, what's happening, how climate engineering is making the warming of the planet worse, not better, in addition to the shredded UV radiation, or shredded ozone layer rather, we have these particulates that are used to deflect the sun's thermal radiation, which is what the patents say, which is what the scientists are trying to push as a reason for geoengineering. Obviously, those particulates trap heat as well. How could they not? They do trap heat. So what's happening now with sea level rise? Here's a recent headline. Earth's most famous climate scientist issues bombshell sea level warning. This headline continues. In what may prove to be a turning point for political action on climate change, a breathtaking new study casts extreme doubt about the near-term stability of global sea levels. The study, written by James Hansen, NASA's former lead climate scientist, and 16 co-authors, many of whom are considered among the top in their fields, concludes that glaciers in Greenland and Antarctica will melt 10 times faster than previous consensus estimates. 10 times faster. Where's the headlines on that? Where's the Searchlight's headlines on that? Or is that just another headline that they want to block? Just as they completely omitted any coverage of major community meetings with former government scientists. This is why our community, our society, is so completely in the dark about dire issues that are closing in on us from every side. The military-industrial complex approach, we have the top U.S. military leaders. I challenge anyone, please investigate what I'm saying. All the top U.S. military leaders are stating on the record that climate change, global warming, is the greatest and most immediate threat faced by our nation? I'm simply asking this. If this is the stated conclusion on the record by our top military leaders, are we to think that they would ask our permission before they engage in climate engineering? That's a very naive notion. Again, I've stated this before, but I want to drive this point home, and I hope hope people go to their internet and search military leaders say global warming is greatest threat. Then ask yourself, same headline, same premise, Obama administration, Obama's science advisor, John Holdren, states the same thing. We have the administration, the military, all saying climate change is the greatest and most immediate threat. Are we to think they would ask our permission before engaging in something that they consider national security? And even though what they're doing is making the situation far worse, not better, and our military brothers and sisters are being told what they're doing is something for the common good, which couldn't be further from the truth. Not only are they, again, toxifying our airs, soils, and waters, they're disrupting the hydrological cycle, the rain cycle, completely disrupting it, not just a little bit. We know that they are not being told the truth on this issue, or I'm quite sure many of them, honorable men and women, would not participate. So we need to get the truth out, but that becomes hard when we have media like the Searchlight. It becomes very hard when they decide that even though there's former military people at the event in Reading, which they didn't cover, speaking out, they decide for us what we see or what we don't see. Until we stop buying that paper, they'll keep doing what they're doing. It's up to us to make them accountable. We have local elected officials doing exactly what the Searchlight's doing. This is truly unfortunate. And I've documented this as well. I passed on testing data to Doug LaMalfa, put it in his hand from California EPA, gave it to his aides. He was in the same meeting. This is on film, by the way. And was later told that by him and his staff that they didn't recognize California EPA as a credible source of data, even though those EPA tests showed that there was massive amounts of aluminum running through our streams. We now have peer-reviewed study stating on the record, as I've stated before, the bees are dying, they're collapsing, everybody knows that. They're packed full of aluminum. Where did that come from? 70 times more aluminum than what it takes to cause Alzheimer's or dementia in a human being. No wonder the bees are dead. How could they not be dead? I've outlined before the whales, full of aluminum also. Aluminum showing up everywhere. And even though we have the disinformation people telling us, well, aluminum's everywhere in the environment. A local radio host just tried to throw this one at me, so we should expect it and everything. If that was the case, nothing would be alive in the first place. Aluminum does not exist in the environment in free form, period. It's always bonded to other elements. It cannot be in the environment in free form unless it's been mined and refined and sprayed or distributed. If you think you're not breathing aluminum and absorbing aluminum, you're wrong. The lab tests prove you are. The medical statistics prove the damage is showing up. Absolutely proves it. So when we have this type of society where everybody is invested in not telling the truth, bad things happen. And on the road we're on, we're not going to get much further if we don't change directions. It's up to all of us to learn what's going on around us, to look at real sources of data. I've stated before, there's a website called, it's a strange name, it's called Rice Farmer. I challenge anybody, look at that site. Just Google Rice Farmer. It's a rice farmer in Japan who posts exceptional news with no politics and no advertising, categorized. Goes to a great deal of effort to do this. Best site I've found for that type of news. Just search Rice Farmer and take a look at the categorized news from around the globe. It's not his news. It's from major sources that we're not shown. It's a great news site. And so the bottom line is, the burden rests on us. It's up to us to find out what's happening. If you care about your children, if you care about their future, if you care about the planet as a whole, you can't not care about the omnicide being fueled by global climate engineering. Omnicide, by the way, means the willful decimation of all life. That's what's happening. GeoEngineeringWatch.org is an educational tool for those that are willing to face this dire issue. GeoEngineeringWatch.org does not sell anything. We're non-political. Our purpose is simple: to help sound the alarm on the climate engineering crimes. Those in power literally have a noose around our necks. The catastrophic drought in California is a direct result of climate engineering. I challenge you to, again, search engineered drought, see what you find. I'm not asking anyone to believe anything I'm saying, as I stated before. I just simply want people to investigate. The bottom line is this: if we don't deal with climate engineering, very soon nothing else will matter. If the biosphere collapses, the economy must follow. No environment, no people. That's a very simple equation. Make your voice heard in this battle. Learn what's happening above your heads. Look up. Ask yourself, where's the blue sky gone? This is Dan Wigington with GeoEngineeringWatch.org. Until next week, thank you.